we're going to apply properties to multi-step addition and subtraction problems. So what that means is we are going to rearrange things in order to add and subtract our integers or rational numbers. So it could be a combination of both, right? It could be an integer, it could be a rational number. All right, so our objective is to identify and write expressions to represent multi-step addition and subtraction problems. So let's talk about a couple of the properties first. Okay? So the commutative property so the commutative property states that if I have A plus B, and A and B can be any number, so it can be a rational number, which is a fraction or a decimal, or it could be an integer. If we rearrange that, it would equal B plus A. So for example, if I have 5 plus 4, I could rearrange that and say 4 plus 5, and we would get the same answer. Okay, so that is what the commutative property is. The associative property, so I'm going to use this down here. So the associative property states that if I have A plus B in parentheses and C is on the outside, I could rearrange those parentheses and put A on the outside and then add B plus C. So let's put some numbers in there. So if I say 5 plus 4 plus 1, I would get 9 plus 1, which is 10, right? So if I move my parentheses, I would do 4 plus 1, which is 5, plus the 5 that is already there, and I would get 10. Okay, so rearranging the parentheses still gives me the same answer. Okay, I'm trying to think what the other property is. So the identity property basically says if I have 5 plus 0, I'm going to get the number that I started with. Or if I have 5 times 1, I'm going to get the number that I started with. So that's what that property means. All right, and then the last one is called the additive inverse. So that means if I add -5 and a +5, or if I add any number, so I could put it -a plus a, it's going to be 0. So when you add the inverse of something, it's going to give you 0. Okay? So those are the properties that we are going to be using today. And can you guys hear me okay? Because I have the fan on because the air conditioner is not working again.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Usually with the fan on, it kind of cuts me in and out. Okay. So, We can hear you good. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So let's look at the first problem. It says Andy usually skates for about 6 hours per week. On Monday, he spends 1 1/5 hours skating. On Wednesday, he spends 2 3/5 hours skating. And on Thursday, he spends 1 5/6 hours skating. Andy wrote the following expression to find the number of hours he spent skating. He grouped Wednesday and Thursday together at first because those were his best days, without thinking too much about what would be easiest to add. Okay, so here it is, 1 1/5 plus 2 3/5 plus 1 5/6. So we are going to rewrite the expression to make it simpler to add. So notice they're moving the parentheses. Okay, so the property that I use when I move parentheses is what? What property am I using if I'm rearranging parentheses?
Wait, what was I going to say? You were doing God, I can see it.
Distributive property?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not doing distributive this round, Kamari, because that is a multiplication property. And right now we're just adding and subtracting. Okay? So it was one of the ones that I reviewed, and matter of fact, is one of the ones on the screen. So which one involves parentheses? The associative property, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, give me a second. Guys, somebody is playing music in the background and I can't hear people. And my computer's being slow, so I'm trying to mute everybody, but it's not working. Alright. So it is the associative property. Alright. And so here I would move my numbers that have the same denominator. So 1 1/5 and 2 3/5. So that's what I would move together. And then over here would be the 1 5/6. Okay? So now it says regrouping makes the problem simpler because it associates two numbers with common denominators. Okay, so that's why we group them, because the denominators are the same. All right, so then we're going to solve it step by step. So what they do is they take out the whole numbers. So we're going to add 1 and 2, because those are my whole numbers, to get 3. And then we're going to add the fractions. So 1/5 and 3/5. And that gives me 4/5. So now we're going to combine the results. So 3 and 4/5 is 3 and 4/5. And it is positive because all three of my numbers are positive. Okay? Alright, so E says use your result from part D to finish evaluating this expression. Because this was just the first two, this and this. Now we got to go back and add 1 and 5/6. So 1 and 5/6. So hopefully you can see that from here to here, they made it a fraction greater than 1. Because 1 times 6 is 6, plus 5 gives me 11. So we're going to do the same thing here. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 4 is 19. So 19 over 5 and 11 over 6. Okay, so we do not have common denominators. So my common denominator, they kind of told us already, is 30. So 5 into 30 is 6. So 19 times 6 is 114. And then you do the same thing for here. 6 times 5 is 30, and so 11 times 5 is 55. And now we just add them. So 114 plus 55 is 169. So then 30 divided into 169 is 5, which is 150, and then we would get 19 left over. So 5 and 19 over 30 would be my answer. Okay? Alright, so the turn and talk says, is there another way to solve this problem? So how can I get rid of fractions? What can I make them?
A decimal?
Yep, okay, I can make them a decimal. So the other way is we could have converted to a decimal. Converted to a decimal. Okay, questions on this page? I'm going to zoom out for those of you that are still taking notes. No questions? All right, so let's move on. So number 2 says, Rochelle dives into a lake from the water's surface. Her change in elevation in the lake is described. She descends 15 and 5/10 feet. She ascends 5 and 1/5 feet. She descends 1 and 6/10 feet. She descends again 20 and 4/10, and ascends 15 and 5/10. Okay, so remember, descend means she's going down, ascend means she's coming up. Okay, so how many feet does Rochelle have left to ascend before reaching the surface? All right, and I will tell you guys there is a problem similar to this on your test, but it has to deal with money. So you add and you take away, and you add and you take away. But there is something like this on your test. All right, so we know that descend is negative 15 and 5/10. We know that ascend means it's a positive 8 and 1/5. They descend again, so that's negative 1 and 6/10. They descend again, 20 and 4/10. And then they ascend again, 15 and 5/10. Alright, so rewrite the expression to make it simpler to find the sum by first adding opposites. So what two numbers are opposites?
15.5 and negative 15.5.
Yep. So negative 15.5 and positive 15.5. And then right now we're just going to bring down the rest of them. So 8 1/5 plus negative that and plus negative 20.4. Okay? So what properties of operations did you use to rewrite my expression? So when I rearrange numbers, what is that property?
Is it associate?
Okay, so we did use associative. That's one of them because we're adding parentheses. But when I rearrange numbers, what property is that? It's right here. Yes. So we are going to use the commutative and the associative. Alright? D says add the opposites in your expression in part B and write the resulting expression. Well, negative 15 plus 5 plus 15.5 gives me 0. Alright, now it says evaluate your expression in part D to determine Rochelle's elevation relative to the water's surface. Alright, so this is 0, so I don't need to rewrite it anywhere else. So 8 1/5 minus 1 6/10 minus 20 4/10. So these two were already grouped together to make it easier, right? Because if I add 6 and 4, I get 10. And I'm adding them because I have a negative and a negative. So negative, we're going to add a negative and a negative, and my answer will be negative. So 6 and 4 is 10. We already have a 1, plus the 1 we carried, so that would be 2, plus the 2 that's already there. So this would give me negative 22. Alright, and the property that we use there, I'm going to add parentheses here, so that told me I needed to add those two first. Because remember, we usually go where? From left to right. But now that I added my parentheses, it means I need to do those two first. And that property is the associative because we added parentheses. Alright, so now my rule says if I have a negative and a positive, I'm going to subtract. So that means I'm going to do 22.0 minus 8 1/5. Well, 8 1/5 they already told me is 8 2/10. So I'm going to subtract 22 minus 8 2/10. So that gives me 10. I borrow, that gives me 11, and this gives me 1. So 10 minus 2 is 8. Bring down my decimal point. 11 minus 8 is 3. And bring down my 1. The larger number is negative, so my answer would be negative 13. Oh, I did that wrong. Hold on. This should have been negative 22. And this would be negative 13 and 8/10. So Rochelle is negative 13 and 8/10 below the water surface. So the original question says, how many feet does Rochelle have left to ascend before reaching the surface? So if she is at negative 13.8, she would have to ascend a positive 13.8. Okay? So then the turn and talk says, how are the properties of addition used to evaluate the expression in part 2? So we use the commutative and associative property to rearrange the numbers to make it easier to add. Okay, so that is what you should have. Oh, fan is blowing it away. Okay, any questions on this page? Alright, well then let's move on to number 3. So number 3 says, Terry is hiking in a valley at its lowest elevation. Abe is hiking on a different trail at an elevation of 23 5/10 meters above sea level. How much higher in elevation is Abe versus Terry? How should elevation below sea level be written? Well, remember, if it's below, how do we represent that?
Negative.
Yep. And if you want to write negative 19 3/4, you could write it like that as well. Alright, since one number is a decimal and one contains a fraction, you must either convert the decimal to a fraction or the fraction to a decimal. Yep, before evaluating. Alright. So what I would do is I would get rid of the fraction. And we know 3/4 is one of those, what we call a benchmark fraction. And so you should know what that is without having to divide. Okay? So 3/4 is 0.75. So it says complete the expressions to show the difference between their elevations. Then evaluate the expression to solve the problem. So in other words, what are we getting? So we're going to subtract a negative 19.75. So it's telling us what we're going to do. We're going to add the opposite. So I'm going to make it addition, and I'm going to make this negative, a positive 19.75. Okay, so I have a positive and a positive. So I'm going to add them. So 23.5 plus 19.75. So I'm going to have to add a 0 up there to add them. So 0 and 5 is 5. 5 and 7 is 12. So 9 plus 3, actually we could do 9 and 1 is 10, right? Plus 3 is 13. And then 2, 3, 4. So the distance between them is 43 and 25/100ths, and it is positive. Because remember, distance between people are always positive. So Abe is 43 and 25/100ths meters higher in elevation than Terry. So it says, is my answer reasonable? Okay, so let's think about it. Here's my number line, right? Here is 0. Terry, no. So Abe is here. And Terry is here. So if I round this to 20, and let's say I round this to 23, we would get somewhere around 43. So that means our answer is reasonable. Okay, so the turn and talk says, what if Abe's elevation was negative 23 instead of positive 23? What would Terry and Abe's elevation difference be then? So that's a completely different problem, right? Because now that means he is here and the other person is here. So now all we want to know is, what is this distance? So instead of adding them, I would have to subtract them. And guys, I can tell you there's one on the test like this as well. Okay, so you would subtract them, which would be 10, 15, 12, and 1. So 10 from 5 is 5. 15 from 7 is 8. 12 minus 9. Yes, Lawrence. 12 minus 9 is 3. And then 1 minus 1 is 0. So the difference would be 3 and 85/100ths. So that would give me a completely different answer. right, so questions. All right, so then that brings us to the check understanding. So we still have about 16 minutes. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to work on the check understanding, and then we will come back and check it. Okay, so 10 minutes. Alfonso started with $50 in his checking account. He recorded these transactions in his checkbook. So he withdrew $12.75. He withdrew again or wrote a check for $5.43. Looks like he deposited $75. Wrote another check for $2.57, or he withdrew it and had another withdrawal of $25.25. So I would rearrange these things to make them easier. So I would do negative 12.75 plus negative 22.25. And I would use one commutative and associative. So I would, commutative would be to rearrange. Associative would be to put them in parentheses. And then we're going to add the negative 5 and 43/100ths plus the negative 2 and 57/100ths, and then the 75 at the end. So hopefully you can see that 75 cents and 25 cents would give me $1. They're both negative, so that's why we're adding. And then 2 plus 2 is 4, plus the 1 that we had would be 5. And then 2 plus 1 is 3. So this one would give me negative 35. Then we're going to add that to this. So hopefully again you can see that 7 and 3 added together give me 1. 4 and 5 is 9. Plus the 1, so that gives me 0, 0. So then 5, 6, 7 plus the 1 would be negative 8. Plus the 75. And then we forgot to go back and add the 50 that he started with. So we can add these together because it's a negative and a negative. So 35 plus 8 is negative 43. 75 and 50 is a positive 125. My rule says if I have a positive and a negative, I subtract them. So 125 minus 43. So that would be 2. Borrow to make 12, that is 0. So this would be 82. And my positive is larger. So he would have 82. And then how can we use commutative and associative? We rearrange to make it easier to add. Alright, so tomorrow we will start, or we will work on the on your own. Alright? You guys have a great afternoon.
Bye, Mr. Lavelle.
Bye-bye.